So a couple quick things here. Going cross country, it's always a good chance to check out different things on the airplane. You get a nice stable airplane as you're moving long distances. So a couple things that we'll check first. This airplane was actually designed to have a 6-cylinder engine in it. This is a low performance version, an economy version of the airplane with fixed gear and then the 4-cylinder engine. My question was, is the wing incidence set correctly? So if you notice in cruise, the nose is sitting above the horizon, and there's sort of a visibility issue where the cowling is kind of breaking up the horizon at butt line 0. So that sort of led you to think that the wing incidence is actually still set for that 6-cylinder engine. So my question was, we can use the flaps to actually lower the nose, so actually change the pitch attitude into the trim condition in cruise. So the question was, if we put maybe a 1/4 inch of flaps out and lower the nose that little bit, will we actually get an increase in performance? Because now we're pushing that thrust vector more directly in the direction that we're going, and we're getting the fuselage body angle more lined up with the true airspeed. So first we need to establish a baseline, so I'm going to get the airplane dead set on 11,500 feet. So up to 11.5, we're going to let it stabilize for, we'll call it 60 seconds. Airplane does have an autopilot, but the pitch stability is so low that we're getting an undamped Fugoi. Legacy is not as bad in pitch as like the Lancer 4 or the Lancer 320, 360, but it's still not known for having particularly high pitch stability. So right now I just have the autopilot working in the GPS mode, so it's just tracking our ground track. See here, we're trying to close the loop here on the pitch axis. All that close, we're going to hold for 60 seconds and see what speed we end up at. Alright, so pretty stable there. And it looks like it's coming out to about 173 knots, 173 here at 20 inches of manifold, 19 inches of manifold, and 2,500 RPM. Alright, so that's our first data point. Now I'm going to lower the flaps about a 1/4 inch. And with that change in flap setting, you can see the nose has come down just a little bit. Alright, so we'll call that point complete. Ground speed is maintained constant there at 172 knots. Once again, assuming that the winds haven't changed, it looks like the flaps did make a difference. Let's try again, one more 1/4 inch. Nose has come down further. And we'll sit here and see if what that does. We'll call that point complete. You can see the ground speed has gone down even further. So it looks like the flaps are definitely not helping. I'll pull the flaps up, see the nose come up. Flaps are retracted, and we'll just get one more confirmation point here with the flaps up. Alright, so with the flaps up, sitting there at 11.5, you can see that the ground speed just about the same within 2 knots. Indicator speed maybe's up 2 knots. So it's definitely any changes that the flaps made were within the error bands of the instruments we're using. So we tried it at 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch deflection of the flaps, and in both cases the effect was nominal, so very little effect. If anything, it's making the airplane go slower, but an interesting test nonetheless. This airplane is outfitted with an autopilot. It has the Dynon Avionics AP74 autopilots in it. And so the question, it's always good to evaluate the autopilot. So we checked the autopilot in 2 different modes. First, doing a ground track mode where it's actually using the GPS to hold the lateral position of the airplane. That mode seems to work pretty well. So you can see that as we sit here, the airplane is gently correcting for any winds here at altitude and putting the airplane back on course. The other question is the altitude hold mode. So we slicked on the altitude hold mode. You can see we're at 11.5 now. I'm going to go stick free so my hands are off of the controls. And we're going to see how well the airplane can hold altitude. You can see we're already picking up some vertical rate there, so the nose is coming down. And you can see the nose coming up to correct. And now we have vertical rate going the opposite direction. You can see the nose coming down to correct. You can see that the magnitude of the oscillation has already increased. Look at that. So now much bigger nose low attitude. You can see we've got almost double the vertical sink. And here's the correction, overcorrection by the autopilot. Nose is now up. Look at all that vertical speed. Wow. Okay, so I would call this divergent. It feels like a divergent phugoid, but I don't think it's the phugoid because the autopilot's in the loop. So we would call that just a failure on the part of the autopilot. We'll go point complete, and we're turning the autopilot altitude hold mode off. And you can see with the altitude mode selected, the airplane is actually overcorrecting. So that's most likely an indication of a limited longitudinal static stability. So the airplane has low longitudinal static stability, and as a result, the autopilot can't compensate for that. So what we're seeing is a divergent oscillation where it starts small and then gets bigger in the long period, longitudinal, sort of like a phugoid oscillation in cruise in altitude hold mode. This is a common problem in the Legacies. I've flown several different autopilots in Legacies, and these with full fuel, the CG is far enough back, the longitudinal stability is low enough that the airplane won't hold altitude in an altitude hold mode with an autopilot.